To the countless anonymous medieval laborers whose aching backs, frostbitten fingers, and perpetually bruised egos built the magnificent and occasionally structurally questionable castles of yore, may your spirits find solace in the knowledge that your work, however painstakingly slow and occasionally hilariously inept by modern standards, continues to inspire awe and a healthy dose of dark amusement centuries later. Your legacy isn't just in the stone, but in the absurd tales whispered on the wind across those very stones, tales of near misses, baffling miscalculations, and the surprisingly effective use of human-powered cranes. This book, a testament to your grit, your ingenuity, and your impressive capacity for enduring the whims of medieval nobility, is dedicated to your unsung and often unappreciated efforts. We salute you, you magnificent, slightly clumsy, and undeniably resilient souls. May your hammers rest, and may your spirits find eternal comfort, perhaps in a slightly less drafty afterlife than the one you toiled in during your earthly existence. Also, we sincerely hope your supervisors weren't as unreasonable as the historical record suggests. If they were, well, let's just say they probably earned their own special corner of the fiery depths. Specifically, this book is dedicated to the memory of Thomas, the fictional foreman of our narrative, a man who faced impossible deadlines, incompetent apprentices, and the ever-present threat of a collapsing tower with unwavering, if occasionally grumpy, determination. His dedication to his craft, despite the overwhelming odds and the frankly ludicrous demands of his superiors, is a testament to the enduring human spirit. While he is fictional, he represents the countless thousands of Thomases who struggled, sweat, and swore their way through the construction of medieval castles. Without them, the romantic ruins we now admire would simply be piles of rubble. This book is a tiny, slightly sarcastic thank you to Thomas and his brethren, the unsung heroes of medieval construction. Finally, a dedication to the modern builders, the successors to these magnificent builders of yore, who, while they have the luxury of power tools, cranes, and accurate blueprints, still face their own set of headaches, deadlines, and the occasional rogue pigeon disrupting progress. May your coffee be strong, your blueprints clear, and your safety harnesses secure. You may not have to contend with the same level of absurdity as your medieval counterparts, but let's be honest, there's always a rogue pigeon somewhere. And maybe a slightly crooked wall. Chapter 1, Sweat, Stone, and Sarcasm. The wind howled a mournful dirge across the bleak landscape, whipping Thomas's already frazzled hair across his face. He squinted, his eyes stinging from the grit kicked up by the relentless hammering. The air hung thick with the smell of sweat, damp earth, and something vaguely resembling despair. This, he thought grimly, was his life, foreman of the most inefficient, back-breaking, and generally miserable quarry in the whole of the kingdom, and today was shaping up to be a particularly spectacular example of that inefficiency. His men, a motley crew of grizzled veterans and wide-eyed novices, toiled away at the rock face with the enthusiasm of condemned men facing a particularly gruesome execution. Their tools, mostly variations on a rusty chisel and a hammer that looked as though it had seen better centuries, were a testament to the cutting-edge technology of the era. Cutting edge being a term used ironically, of course, given the amount of blood that regularly stained the quarry floor. Today's target, a particularly stubborn vein of limestone, destined eventually to become part of the castle wall, a wall that Thomas suspected might crumble before it even saw its first siege. He'd seen enough near misses, enough agonizingly slow progress, to harbor a deep and abiding skepticism about the entire enterprise. Constructing a castle in the 13th century was not, as the Romantic ballads suggested, a noble pursuit. It was, to put it mildly, a monumental pain in the arse. One poor fellow, a scrawny lad barely old enough to shave, let alone wield a hammer, let out a yelp. A sliver of rock had pinged off his forehead, leaving a crimson streak against the dust on his face. Thomas sighed. Another casualty in the great quarry caper. He considered intervening, but decided against it. The boy would live, probably, and it wasn't as though they had enough hands as it was. The attrition rate in this quarry was rivaled only by the Black Death, and Thomas was beginning to suspect they were losing more men to minor injuries than the plague ever did. The sheer absurdity of it all never ceased to amaze him. Here they were, expending Herculean effort, sweat, blood, and tears, literally, to extract a few relatively unimpressive blocks of stone, blocks that upon closer inspection often turned out to be cracked, flawed, or otherwise unsuitable for their intended purpose. They'd spend weeks wresting a single perfect-looking stone from the earth, only to discover a hairline fracture upon closer examination. The sheer waste of human energy was enough to make even the most hardened soul weep. But then they also had to haul said stone to the castle site, which meant more sweat, more sore muscles, and a higher chance of accidental death. "Right, lads," Thomas bellowed, his voice hoarse from shouting over the wind and the constant clang of hammers. "Let's see some movement. We're behind schedule, and Lord Elmsworth isn't known for his patience, especially when his wine cellar isn't properly chilled." He knew perfectly well that Lord Elmsworth's impatience stemmed from the endless flow of funds and the frustratingly slow pace of the castle build. It did little to improve Thomas's mood, however. The man had the temperament of a rabid badger and the attention span of a goldfish. Changes to the plans were announced daily, usually while in the middle of a celebratory feast. Lord Elmsworth, you see, held a firm belief in divine inspiration, particularly when it involved adding a superfluous turret or extending a perfectly adequate wing. Thomas watched as his men, spurred by the threat of Elmsworth's wrath, or possibly the prospect of a slightly less meager portion of gruel, redoubled their efforts. He knew he should be feeling some sense of accomplishment, of overseeing a monumental task, but all he felt was exhaustion, a dull ache in his bones, and a profound sense of futility. The quarry seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon, a bleak testament to the sheer, mind-numbing amount of work involved in simply gathering the raw materials for a castle. The landscape itself seemed to mirror the relentless tedium of their work. Jagged rocks jutted from the earth like skeletal fingers, the wind whistling through the crevices like a mournful spirit. There was a desolate beauty to it, a raw, unyielding harshness that somehow reflected the brutal reality of their lives. The sun, a malevolent eye in the overcast sky, offered little warmth, its rays doing little to alleviate the chill that permeated the very bones of this desolate place. He considered idly the possibility of a mass escape, a midnight flight to a faraway land where rocks didn't exist, or at least didn't demand so much bloody effort to extract. But the thought was as fanciful as expecting a perfectly square stone from this cursed quarry. He was trapped, just like his men, in a cycle of endless labor, punctuated only by the occasional injury and the ever present fear of Lord Elmsworth's displeasure. One particularly stubborn boulder, twice the size of any they'd wrestled free before, resisted all attempts at extraction. It seemed to taunt them, mocking their feeble efforts. For hours they hammered and chipped, their movements growing increasingly frantic and desperate. Sweat streamed down their faces, mixing with the dust to create a thick, mud-caked mask. Their muscles screamed in protest, their bodies aching from the relentless strain. Thomas, observing from the relative safety of a slightly elevated vantage point, felt a pang of sympathy, a flicker of shared misery. Suddenly, a crack appeared. A collective cheer erupted, thin and ragged from the exhausted men. The boulder, finally surrendering to their relentless assault, split in two, revealing a gleaming face of perfect limestone. For a brief moment, amidst the chaos and exhaustion, there was a sense of triumph, a fleeting feeling of accomplishment. Then, just as quickly, the euphoria vanished, replaced by the grim reality of the next task. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, ominous shadows across the quarry, Thomas watched his men, their faces streaked with dirt and sweat, slowly pack up their tools. They shuffled towards the rough-hewn huts that served as their accommodation, their steps weary, their bodies broken. They were weary and sore, their dreams of escape as distant as the stars twinkling in the inky sky above. Another day had been survived, another small pile of stones extracted from the reluctant earth. The great quarry caper continued, a testament to the endless cycle of sweat, stone, and sarcasm that defined life in the 13th century. And Thomas, that gruff, secretly kind foreman, knew he had another day of the same ahead of him. The thought did not fill him with joy, but it didn't fill him with despair either. He knew somehow that as long as he had his band of weary quarrymen, he could face anything, even Lord Elmsworth. Almost. The next morning dawned, gray and sullen, mirroring Thomas's mood. He'd barely slept, haunted by visions of misaligned stones and Lord Elmsworth's furious face. The plans, or rather the attempt at plans, lay before him, a collection of smudged parchment riddled with ambiguous symbols and annotations that looked suspiciously like a drunken spider had taken up calligraphy. These weren't blueprints. They were more like cryptic riddles designed to test the sanity of anyone unfortunate enough to decipher them. "Right, lads," Thomas announced, his voice a gravelly rasp. "Today, we're tackling the west wall, or at least what's supposed to be the west wall." He gestured vaguely at the chaotic pile of stones, a haphazard monument to medieval inefficiency. According to this masterpiece, he tapped a particularly indecipherable section of the parchment. It should be, well, it should be something. The men grunted in response, their expressions a mixture of weariness and bewildered resignation. They'd grown accustomed to the constant revisions, the ever-shifting plans, the infuriating lack of precision. Medieval measurement, it turned out, was a highly subjective affair. A fathom, Thomas muttered to himself, remembering the master mason's vague explanation, is roughly the length of a man's outstretched arms. Which man, and in what mood? The ensuing construction was a masterpiece of controlled chaos. One worker, attempting to lay a stone according to the master mason's cryptic markings, accidentally built a section of the wall several feet too short. The resulting uproar was deafening. Lord Elmsworth, alerted by the commotion and possibly the scent of fear, arrived, his face a thundercloud. After a brief inspection and a somewhat theatrical display of outrage, he decreed that the wall must be raised to the correct height. The scene that followed was a testament to the sheer stubbornness of medieval builders. Stone by agonizing stone, they painstakingly rebuilt the deficient section. They chipped, they hauled, they cursed, all under the watchful gaze of a surprisingly patient Lord Elmsworth. Perhaps his wine cellar was adequately stocked. This wasn't just building. It was a Sisyphean task of epic proportions, a monument to human endurance, fueled by nothing but gruel and the fear of losing one's fingers in a particularly poorly placed hammer swing. The problem wasn't just the imprecision of the measurements. It was the sheer unpredictability of Lord Elmsworth's whims. One moment, the castle was to be a sturdy, practical fortress. The next, it was to be a whimsical fantasy, complete with superfluous towers, oddly placed balconies, and an inexplicably large moat, the depth of which, naturally, was never definitively decided. This led to a constant state of flux, a never-ending cycle of building, demolishing, and rebuilding. The landscape around the castle became a graveyard of discarded stones, a testament to the aristocratic penchant for changing one's mind mid-project. One particularly frustrating episode involved a planned archway. The master mason, a man whose mathematical skills seemed to fluctuate with the tides, had miscalculated the curvature. The resulting archway was less an elegant curve and more a grotesque parody of one, threatening to collapse under its own weight. The solution, of course, was to demolish it and start again. Thomas watched, his face a mask of grim determination, as the men, their faces grimy and their spirits crushed, diligently dismantled the defective archway, muttering darkly about the master mason's lineage and questionable parentage. Even the seemingly simple task of transporting stones proved to be fraught with difficulties. Medieval roads, or rather the absence of decent roads, added another layer of complexity. Carts frequently got stuck, oxen strained under impossible loads, and the entire operation often came to a standstill due to a surprisingly stubborn wheel or a collapsed bridge. Thomas learned to accept delays with the stoicism of a seasoned monk. For every logistical problem was a fresh opportunity to complain about the inadequacy of the kingdom's infrastructure. The sheer amount of wasted material was also a constant source of frustration. Stones were chipped, cracked, or otherwise deemed unsuitable for use. This wasn't due to any inherent flaws in the stone itself. It was more often the result of clumsy handling, inaccurate cutting, and the general lack of precision in every aspect of the process. The ground surrounding the castle became a landscape of discarded stone, a silent testament to the inefficiency of medieval construction techniques. Yet, amidst all the chaos, the humor persisted. The men developed a dark, gallows humor to cope with the incessant frustrations. Their jokes often involved Lord Elmsworth, his erratic decision-making, and his penchant for interrupting the work for impromptu feasts. The stories they shared, tales of collapsing walls, runaway carts, and near misses with falling stones, were a testament to their resilience and their ability to find humor in the most dire of circumstances. As the days bled into weeks and the weeks into months, the castle slowly took shape. It was a testament to the unwavering determination of the builders, to their ability to endure the setbacks, the frustrations, and the endless cycle of measuring the impossible. It was a building born of sweat, stone, and sarcasm, a monument to human ingenuity, and an endless series of comical errors. The end result, a castle that stood, perhaps a little crooked, perhaps a little unconventional, but standing nonetheless, a testament to the absurd, glorious, and utterly chaotic world of medieval castle construction. A world where measuring the impossible was not just a challenge, but a daily reality. A world where even the most meticulously drawn plans could be rendered meaningless by a noble's sudden whim, and where a perfectly good stone could end up discarded because it wasn't exactly the right shade of gray. A world, in short, that Thomas wouldn't trade for anything, except maybe a less demanding job, or a vacation, or perhaps both. The West Wall, a testament to human stubbornness and questionable architectural judgment, finally stood, or at least, it appeared to stand. The next challenge, looming large and literally towering over the entire project, was the main keep's tower. A behemoth of gray stone, it was to be the castle's crowning glory, a symbol of Lord Elmsworth's power, and more importantly, his impeccable, though questionable, taste. The tower's construction presented a new set of challenges that involved significantly more cursing and a much higher risk of sudden, gravity-induced demise. The first issue was, predictably, the plans, or rather, the lack thereof. Lord Elmsworth, in a rare moment of clarity, or perhaps a particularly potent vintage, had declared that the tower should be majestic, yet practical, and, oh, by the way, it must be taller than Sir Reginald's tower, and preferably painted a shade of blue that reminds me of my late Aunt Mildred's favorite bonnet. Translating this vague directive into actual construction plans proved to be a task worthy of the most skilled and possibly slightly insane cartographer. The task of lifting the massive stones to the dizzying heights of the nascent tower was a feat of engineering worthy of the Greek gods, or at least worthy of several hundred very strong, very sweaty, and exceptionally ingenious medieval laborers. Forget cranes, forget pulleys. Medieval technology had provided them with ropes, wooden scaffolding that creaked ominously with every gust of wind, and an almost disturbing amount of faith in human chains. Human chains, Thomas explained to a new recruit, a pale, wide-eyed youth named Giles, are exactly what they sound like, a chain made of men, each man holding onto the next, passing the stones up the line, like some sort of bizarre, muscle-powered elevator. He demonstrated, lifting a small stone aloft. Think of it as a team-building exercise, with gravity and a high probability of broken bones. Giles's eyes widened further. "And if someone lets go?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Thomas chuckled, a sound like gravel tumbling down a hill. "Then," he said, a gleam of mischief in his eyes, You pray to whatever deity you believe in that the man below has a strong grip and the stone lands harmlessly. The first few days of tower construction were a symphony of creaks, groans, and increasingly desperate prayers. The scaffolding, a precarious network of wooden beams and ropes, swayed alarmingly in the wind. The stones, each weighing enough to crush a small village, were hoisted upwards with a combination of sheer muscle power and an almost reckless disregard for safety regulations, which in fairness did not exist at the time. Several close calls involved near misses with plummeting stones and a few instances of men being flung from the scaffolding, only to land surprisingly unscathed in a soft pile of rubble, a testament to the resilience, or perhaps just the sheer luck, of medieval builders. The weather, always a loyal antagonist in medieval construction projects, decided to add its own unique challenges. A sudden downpour turned the building site into a muddy swamp, making the already treacherous scaffolding even more unstable. Thomas watched, his face a mask of grim amusement, as men slipped and slid, their attempts to maintain their precarious positions resembling a particularly ungainly ballet. But it wasn't just the weather and the perilous heights. There was also the issue of accuracy. The medieval concept of plumb seemed to be more of a suggestion than a strict guideline. The tower, therefore, was slowly taking shape in a way that could generously be described as eccentric. One side was slightly taller than the other, a section leaned precariously to one side, and there was a distinct wobble whenever a strong gust of wind blew through. This, however, did not seem to unduly concern Lord Elmsworth, who, after yet another wine-fueled inspection, declared it to be charmingly rustic. Then came the day of the great stone, a monstrous piece of rock. It was the keystone of the entire tower, the one that would hold everything together. The lift, however, seemed destined for disaster. The rope, already frayed from weeks of heavy lifting, began to snap under the weight. The human chain, a desperate line of straining bodies, groaned. A single man, a stout fellow named Bartholomew, slipped. Thomas, surveying the scene from below, knew he had to act, and fast. He made a split-second decision, one that was entirely illogical, wildly reckless, and in retrospect, possibly insane. He ordered the men below to quickly reinforce the scaffolding with extra timbers, while he himself, with the help of a hastily assembled team, wedged a large wooden beam into the ever-widening crack in the wall. It was a gamble, a desperate attempt to redistribute the weight. If it failed, the entire tower would collapse. The tension was palpable. The groan of the stone, the creak of the wood, the strained grunts of the men. It was a symphony of disaster waiting to happen. Then, as the stone neared its final resting place, the beam held. A cheer, ragged and relieved, erupted from the workers. The tower, crooked, wobbly, and undeniably defiant of all known principles of engineering, was complete. The celebration that followed involved copious amounts of ale, copious amounts of backslapping, which, considering the state of their hands, might have been more painful than celebratory, and a somewhat sheepish apology from Lord Elmsworth, who had briefly considered ordering the entire structure to be demolished and rebuilt, a notion that was quickly abandoned when reminded of the immense cost of such a venture. Thomas, surveying his creation, the monument to medieval ingenuity, human endurance, and sheer dumb luck, found himself smiling, a rare occurrence these days. The tower stood, a testament to the chaos, the humor, and the indomitable spirit of those who built it. It was a monument to sweat, stone, and sarcasm, and just another chapter in the ongoing, utterly unpredictable saga of constructing a medieval castle. A castle where the next challenge, the next almost disaster, was always just around the corner, and where laughter, often born out of sheer terror, was the only reasonable response to the impossible. The West Wall, that monument to human stubbornness and questionable architectural judgment, was almost complete. Almost. A long, imposing stretch of gray stone. It should have been a thing of beauty, a testament to the meticulous skill of medieval masonry. Instead, it resembled a drunken giant attempting a particularly wobbly jig. The problem, of course, was the plumb line, or rather, the complete and utter disregard for the plumb line. Thomas, the de facto foreman, a title he'd earned more through sheer force of personality than any formal appointment, surveyed the damage with a sigh that could have deflated a dragon. The wall, intended to be a straight, unwavering line, had developed a distinct curve, a subtle S-bend that grew more pronounced the further one's gaze traveled along its length. "Blast it all to the hells," he roared, his voice echoing across the muddy construction site. Several laborers jumped, spilling buckets of mortar and narrowly avoiding a collision with a stray stone. One, a particularly unfortunate soul named Edgar, landed face first in a pile of freshly mixed lime, emerging looking like a pale, plaster-covered ghost. "Did you see that, Edgar?" Thomas asked, wiping a hand across his brow. "It's unique." The cause of the catastrophe? A confluence of factors, all stemming from the inherent limitations of medieval construction. Firstly, there was the lack of sophisticated measuring tools. Their plumb bob was more erratic than a drunken sailor, swinging wildly in the wind, offering guidance as helpful as a badger's opinion on architecture. Secondly, there were the assistants, a motley crew of eager but exceptionally clumsy individuals whose understanding of geometry seemed to be inversely proportional to their enthusiasm. "Hold the plumb bob steady, Cuthbert," Thomas had bellowed earlier that day, as the bob swung wildly, careening between the wall and a particularly disgruntled pig that had wandered into the site. "Steady, I say. It's not a bloody pendulum in a cathedral clock tower." Cuthbert, bless his uncoordinated heart, had instead managed to swing the plumb bob into a bucket of water, splashing himself and several nearby workers in the process. And thirdly, there were the stones themselves. No two were precisely the same size, shape, or weight. Fitting them together required the skill of a seasoned jigsaw puzzler, a puzzler who was also blindfolded and working in a sandstorm. The result, as Thomas was now grimly surveying, was a wall that resembled nothing so much as a slightly oversized snake that had been hastily stuffed into a straitjacket. It was a visual marvel in a purely horrifying sense. "Right," Thomas announced, his voice now carrying a steely edge of determination. "We're going to fix this, and by fix this, I mean we're going to try our damnedest to camouflage this disaster before Lord Elmsworth returns and orders us all to be fed to the wolves." The attempt to rectify the situation involved a series of increasingly desperate and increasingly absurd measures. The idea of simply demolishing the offending section of the wall and rebuilding it was quickly discarded. Lord Elmsworth's temper was already at a boiling point due to the previously mentioned issues with the tower, and the financial implications of starting again were enough to make even the most optimistic stonemason contemplate a career change. Instead, the men resorted to a plan that involved strategically placing smaller stones in an attempt to even out the curve. It was like trying to smooth a wrinkled shirt using only a garden trowel, labor intensive, mostly futile, and ultimately deeply unsatisfying. Thomas personally supervised each stone placement, issuing a torrent of instructions and curses that would make a seasoned pirate blush. Whoa. Wiggle it slightly to the left. No, the other left. Blast it all, Cuthbert. Are you deliberately trying to sabotage this? As the day wore on, the wall took on an even more peculiar appearance. The attempted corrections only served to emphasize the original curve, creating a series of bulges and dips that looked suspiciously like the landscape of a particularly bumpy moon. The more they tried to fix it, the more crooked it became, a perverse testament to the inherent difficulty of working with unforgiving materials and an even more unforgiving tools. Even the weather seemed to conspire against them. A sudden squall hit the construction site, lashing the wind and sending the men scurrying for shelter. When the storm cleared, they discovered that a particularly sizable section of the already crooked wall had collapsed, leaving a gap that resembled a gaping maw. Well, Thomas said, staring at the newly enlarged imperfection, attempting a somewhat feeble attempt at humor. At least now it looks more like a proper dragon's lair, if you squint. The remaining workers looked at him, their expressions a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief. They spent the next few days attempting to repair the collapse, only to discover that the wall, weakened by the storm and burdened by the weight of its own inherent flaws, was proving rather resistant to further repair. Every attempt to stabilize the structure ended in further unplanned modifications. It was as if the wall had a mind of its own, a perverse will to defy human effort and remain perpetually crooked. By the time Lord Elmsworth eventually returned to inspect his beloved castle, the wall was a masterpiece of unintentional artistry, a breathtakingly, hilariously crooked testament to the challenges of medieval construction. Lord Elmsworth, after a moment of stunned silence, during which one could practically hear the grinding of his teeth, uttered a single word, charming. Thomas, exhausted, covered in mud, and nursing a bruised ego, had to concede that perhaps the description was somewhat appropriate. The wall, in its own peculiar way, possessed a unique character. It was a monument to human ingenuity, a testament to the limitations of tools, and a particularly effective warning against the dangers of ignoring simple geometry. Most importantly, it was a reminder that even the most ambitious building projects often end up a little off-kilter, and sometimes the best course of action was simply to accept the crookedness and move on. The curse of the crooked wall, it seemed, could only be broken by laughter. The relentless sun beat down on the sprawling construction site, turning the already muddy ground into a mire of viscous clay. The air hung thick with the smell of sweat, damp stone, and something vaguely resembling despair. This wasn't the romantic vision of medieval castle building, often depicted in tapestries and ballads. This was the raw, brutal reality, and it was taking its toll. Thomas watched, a grim expression etched onto his face, as young Barnaby limped away, his face a mask of pain. Barnaby had lost a finger, cleanly severed by a poorly wielded pickaxe, a testament to the lack of safety measures and the prevalence of rushed work. It wasn't the first such accident, nor would it be the last. Fingers, toes, even the occasional eye were routinely sacrificed on the altar of Lord Elmsworth's grandiose ambitions. The living quarters for the workers were cramped, squalid affairs, little more than hastily constructed lean-tos, offering scant protection from the elements. Hygiene was a luxury they couldn't afford, and disease ran rampant, spreading through the ranks like wildfire. Dysentery was a common companion, its relentless grip a constant reminder of the precariousness of their existence. The men worked from dawn till dusk, their bodies aching, their spirits crushed by the unending toil. The constant threat of injury, illness, and death loomed over them like a suffocating blanket. Even their teeth suffered. The coarse bread, the lack of proper dental care, and the ever-present dust and grit took their toll, resulting in a workforce sporting a disturbing array of missing and decaying teeth. Many chewed their food with grim determination, their jaws a testament to their endurance. The sight of a full set of pearly whites was rarer than a clear day in a swamp. But the physical suffering was only part of the story. The psychological toll was even more insidious. The relentless pressure to meet deadlines, the constant fear of Lord Elmsworth's wrath, and the sheer monotony of the work slowly chipped away at their sanity. Men became withdrawn, their eyes vacant, their faces etched with a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. Whispers of madness drifted through the camp like a phantom wind, speaking of men who had simply given up, lost to the crushing weight of their existence. The construction site itself was a dangerous labyrinth of half-finished walls, precarious scaffolding, and precarious piles of stones, posing a constant threat to life and limb. Accidents were commonplace. A misstep, a misplaced stone, a sudden gust of wind, all capable of bringing about a catastrophic injury, or worse. It wasn't unusual for men to return from work sporting fresh injuries, a gash here, a bruise there. These injuries were worn as badges of honor, testament to their stubborn refusal to succumb to the crushing demands of their labor. But their bodies were paying a heavy price. Thomas found himself haunted by Barnaby's limping form. He felt a twinge of guilt. He'd pushed the men hard that day, driven by the relentless pressure to appease Lord Elmsworth and keep the project moving forward. He hadn't even paused for a moment to ensure the workers had adequate tools, proper supervision, or even a moment's respite. He'd been so focused on the deadlines, so obsessed with the need for efficiency, that he'd overlooked the very real cost of his demands. The human cost. That night, under the bleak light of a waning moon, Thomas sat alone, staring into the flickering flames of a small fire. The cheers and laughter of other workers in the nearby encampment were muted, almost foreign. He tried to remember when he'd last truly laughed. It felt like a lifetime ago. He thought about Barnaby and the others, each a victim of an endless and unforgiving cycle, their bodies and minds relentlessly worn down by the brutal demands of the castle's construction. He had a sudden, horrifying realization. It wasn't just the stones and mortar that formed the castle, it was their sweat, their blood, their very souls. This imposing edifice was built on a foundation of human sacrifice. The irony was bitter. These men were sacrificing their lives, their limbs, their very minds, for a structure that would likely outlive them all by centuries. A structure that would stand as a monument to their suffering, while their names were lost to the annals of time, remembered by none. The next morning, Thomas approached the men with a newfound sense of urgency. He initiated daily safety checks, introduced rudimentary safety procedures, and even managed to secure a small supply of bandages and rudimentary medical supplies. He instituted shorter working hours, which was greeted by exhausted groans of approval from the workers. He realized that even minor improvements could significantly impact the lives of these men. Lord Elmsworth, of course, was initially less than pleased with the reduced output and the increased costs, but Thomas's newly acquired steely resolve, along with a carefully crafted explanation of the increased costs related to fewer accidents and less downtime, convinced him, at least for now. The changes were small, but they made a difference. Accidents decreased, though they didn't vanish entirely. The atmosphere in the camp, however, became noticeably less oppressive. There was a shift in the dynamics, a greater emphasis on camaraderie and mutual support. The men worked together, sharing their burdens, their stories, their pain. It was a fragile equilibrium, but it was a start. Still, the shadow of the castle loomed large, a stark reminder of the human price paid for progress. The walls grew taller, the stones more imposing, but for Thomas, the true monument was the resilient spirit of the men who built it, the men who had lost so much, who had persevered through unimaginable hardship, whose bodies and minds bore the scars of their toil. He still felt the weight of their burden, the weight of the guilt and the responsibility. The castle would stand as a testament to their sacrifice, their resilience, and the dark humor they employed to cope with their grim realities. It was a testament to the endurance of the human spirit, a grotesque, awe-inspiring monument to the sweat, stone, and sarcasm that defined medieval castle building, and the ultimate cost of human ambition. Chapter 2: A Century in Stone. The grandson of old Elias, a man named Thomas Jr., squinted at the nascent battlements, a familiar ache in his back, mirroring the persistent discomfort of his grandfather. He'd heard tales, countless tales from Elias, stories whispered around crackling fires, filled with the earthy smell of damp stone and the ghosts of long-dead men. Tales of the castle's beginnings, a time when the very foundations were laid by men whose names were lost to the ages, their bones likely mingled with the very mortar that held the stones together. Thomas Jr. wasn't just building a castle, he was adding another layer to a generational lasagna of sweat, grit, and occasionally, surprisingly, a bit of dark humor. His grandfather, Elias, had spoken of the original master mason, a man named, as far as anyone could recall, simply Old Giles. Old Giles, apparently, had a penchant for disastrously optimistic measurements, leading to a series of near collapses that were only averted by the sheer stubbornness of the workers and a healthy dose of divine intervention, or, as Elias cynically suggested, exceptionally strong scaffolding. The tools remained largely unchanged from his grandfather's time, heavy, inefficient, and prone to snapping at the most inopportune moments. A new generation of pickaxes, hammers, and chisels were brought in, but the underlying principles were as old as the hills. These tools had seen more generations than most men saw years, each crack and chip a testament to the relentless work, the relentless passing of time. The castle, much like a particularly stubborn oak tree, had endured. Its growth, however, was glacial compared to the rapid pace of construction in the present day. One could almost imagine a ghost of old Giles muttering about the atrocious quality of modern materials were the castle somehow capable of speaking. Thomas Jr. chuckled, a sound lost in the wind whistling through the half-finished walls. The speed at which they built these days was a joke, really. He knew a fellow who'd helped erect one of those newfangled glass and steel edifices in the city. It rose in months, if not weeks. This monstrosity they labored over, slowly accumulating more stones than a particularly extravagant dragon's hoard, would take generations. It was, he thought grimly, a kind of slow-motion apocalypse for all involved. Imagine, he mused, explaining this to one of those quick-building city folk. Oh, it's a family affair, he'd say with a wry smile. My father, my grandfather, his father, and back before the king's great-grandfather had even hit puberty, all chipped away at this same bloody thing. He'd pause, letting the absurdity of it sink in before adding, with a dramatic flourish, and we're still not even halfway done. The king had changed several times during the castle's construction. The original monarch who commissioned it, a rather portly man named Richard, was long dead, replaced by his son, then grandson. Their architectural preferences, thankfully, tended towards continuity. However, the political shifts had created some interesting disruptions. A rebellion in the early years, for example, resulted in the sudden and abrupt abandonment of a perfectly good wing, leaving it as a permanent testament to the temporary nature of power and the frustratingly permanent nature of half-built castle wings. Through the years, the techniques had evolved in a very slow, organic way. New generations brought their own wrinkles to the established methods. Thomas Jr., for instance, had managed to convince his men to try out a crude pulley system, vastly improving their ability to hoist stones to the upper levels. This innovation, however, came with its own set of problems, mainly in the form of numerous near misses and the occasional spectacular rope snap, resulting in a few bruised egos and a very dented helmet. The workers themselves formed a peculiar sort of dynasty. Familial connections spanned generations. Sons followed fathers, grandsons followed grandfathers, often inheriting not just their tools, but also their aches, their calluses, and their grimly humorous approach to the almost eternal task at hand. They told tales of their ancestors, sharing memories embellished by time and the occasional tall tale. One might hear the story of great Uncle Bartholomew, whose fingers were claimed by a rogue stone, or Old Man Fitzwilliam, who swore he'd seen the ghost of old Giles guiding a particularly unruly stone into place. The lives of these builders were hard, and not just physically. The social aspects were equally challenging. A medieval construction site was a reflection of the stratified society they lived in. Noble overseers gave orders. Skilled masons enjoyed a bit more privilege, while unskilled laborers endured the most grueling work. Yet there existed a strange sense of unity among them. Their shared struggle, their collective effort to raise this massive structure, created a unique bond that transcended class divides. A shared hardship often breeds shared understanding, even humor. Thomas Jr. paused his work, wiping a trickle of sweat from his brow. He looked across the sprawling site at the men working with their traditional tools, building upon the work of their ancestors. The generations blended into each other, a blur of sweat, stone, and laughter. He noticed something new, though, a flicker of hope amidst their weariness, a shared hope that one day they would see this monstrous project come to an end. That hope was both a driving force and a testament to their perseverance. The castle itself was no longer just a monument to a king's ambition, but a testament to the generations of men who had dedicated their lives to building it. Their collective efforts, woven together across centuries, had created something truly remarkable. Even in its imperfections, the slightly off-kilter walls, the haphazard placement of certain stones, the wing that mysteriously cut short, the structure spoke of enduring resilience and relentless determination. Each stone, each imperfection, carried the weight of stories, of lives lived and lost in the pursuit of a shared goal. The castle was a monument to their sweat, blood, and sarcasm, a legacy of generations, built not only of stone and mortar, but of grit, perseverance, and a surprisingly resilient sense of humor in the face of immense adversity. It was a dark, morbid, glorious testament to the human spirit, a monument so monumental that its construction surpassed the limits of a single human life, or indeed multiple human lifetimes, proving in its slow, relentless ascent that even the most ambitious projects could be achieved, one stone, one generation, one dark joke at a time. Old Giles, the original master mason, wasn't a mythical figure conjured from the mists of time, but a real man, albeit one whose legend had been considerably embellished by generations of weary stonemasons. Thomas Jr. had pored over the castle's fragmented records, painstakingly piecing together a picture of the man from scattered mentions in dusty ledgers and faded parchments. He wasn't some infallible architect, divinely inspired to bring forth this majestic structure. He was, in fact, remarkably prone to error. The records hinted at a man of considerable skill, capable of intricate designs and breathtaking feats of masonry, but they also documented a rather alarming tendency towards optimism, let's call it. His initial plans, for instance, were breathtaking in their ambition, almost laughably so considering the primitive tools and techniques available. He envisioned soaring arches that defied the laws of physics, impossibly tall towers that threatened to topple under their own weight, and a grand entrance hall so vast it could comfortably house a small village. The sheer scale of his ambition was matched only by his catastrophic miscalculations. The first major near disaster involved the West Wing. Apparently, old Giles had misjudged the load-bearing capacity of the foundation by a rather significant margin. The result? A spectacular, albeit thankfully slow motion, collapse of a newly erected section, narrowly avoided becoming a tragic incident that wiped out nearly half of the workforce. The surviving workers, according to Elias's tales, swore that they could hear old Giles's exasperated muttering echoing amidst the falling stones, blaming the substandard quality of the local limestone, the capriciousness of the wind, and the lack of proper appreciation for his artistic genius. This wasn't an isolated incident. The castle's construction was punctuated by a series of smaller, yet equally dramatic mishaps, each one a testament to old Giles's optimistic estimations and the remarkably robust scaffolding that somehow managed to keep the entire enterprise from tumbling into a chaotic heap of rubble. A particularly memorable occasion involved a disastrously misplaced cornerstone, causing a significant portion of the north wall to list alarmingly to one side. This event, according to legend, resulted in a week-long drinking binge for the entire workforce, financed by the increasingly frantic king, who was understandably unnerved by the sight of his castle leaning like a drunken giant. One particularly humorous yet harrowing tale involved a disastrous attempt at constructing an elaborate spiral staircase within one of the towers. Old Giles, in his boundless enthusiasm, had designed a staircase that spiraled upwards with breathtaking elegance, but tragically failed to account for the simple fact that gravity exists and that unsupported stonework has a nasty habit of falling down. The resulting collapse, which involved a chaotic cascade of stones, plaster, and terrified masons, resulted in a significant delay to the project and a rather substantial dent in the king's treasury. It was during this staircase debacle that old Giles experienced his final and most spectacular mishap. A scaffold, weakened by years of wear and tear and a questionable understanding of load distribution, decided to stage a dramatic rebellion. Old Giles, perched precariously on the upper levels, attempting to direct operations with a combination of frantic hand gestures and increasingly desperate shouts, found himself the unfortunate victim of this structural revolt. His plummet from grace, quite literally, was both a spectacle and a tragedy. He landed thankfully in a relatively soft pile of rubble and broken masonry, narrowly escaping serious injury, although his dignity was most certainly crushed beneath the weight of the falling stones. His injuries were mainly limited to a bruised ego and a severe case of whiplash. More concerning, however, was the impact on his reputation. The increasingly nervous king, already facing mounting costs and delays, decided that a change was needed. Old Giles, despite his undeniable skill, was deemed a liability, too unpredictable and prone to catastrophic failures. He was unceremoniously dismissed, his place taken by a more cautious, if arguably less imaginative successor. The remaining records offer no further details on old Giles's fate, only whispers of a disgruntled master mason wandering the countryside, muttering about the incompetence of his former assistants, the poor quality of the local stone, and the overall lack of appreciation for his artistic vision. His story became a cautionary tale for future generations of stonemasons, a reminder that even the most gifted artisans can be undone by their own hubris and a distinct lack of adherence to the principles of basic structural engineering. The castle, however, continued its slow, inexorable rise, a testament not just to the skill of its builders, but also to their remarkable resilience, their ability to adapt to the mistakes of their predecessors, and their surprisingly good sense of humor in the face of repeated near cataclysms. Each stone, each imperfection, served as a silent reminder of old Giles and his spectacularly flawed, yet ultimately endearing, contribution to this monumental structure. The slightly off-kilter walls, the oddly placed windows, even the now infamous spiral staircase, which was of course rebuilt to a safer, if less aesthetically pleasing design, all contributed to the unique character of the castle, a peculiar blend of grandeur, chaos, and a deeply ingrained sense of dark medieval humor. Thomas Jr. often found himself staring at the seemingly random placements of certain stones, wondering if the original workers had simply run out of patience, if a sudden thunderstorm had forced them to place stones somewhat haphazardly, or if perhaps a particularly boisterous game of dice had determined the final resting place of some of the more wayward stones. Some of the newer stones were perfectly symmetrical, others were irregular, rough, and seemed almost deliberately misplaced. It was almost as if the builders had incorporated their frustrations, their exhaustion, and their occasional lapses into despair into the very fabric of the castle. He understood now, looking back across the centuries, that the castle's construction was not a linear progression, but a chaotic dance between ambition, ingenuity, and pure, unadulterated disaster. It was a story told not only in the precise, almost perfectly placed stones, but also in the irregularities, the imperfections, the evidence of repeated attempts, modifications, and accidental collapses. The walls whispered tales of hurried repairs, of last-minute adjustments, and of the occasional near-fatal mishap. They bore witness to the sweat, the blood, and the surprisingly resilient sense of humor that defined the lives of those who had toiled upon this enduring monument. And Thomas Jr. realized with a chuckle a certain amount of that same absurdity still echoed through the construction site today. The relentless wind, the fickle weather, the occasional rogue stone that threatened to bring down the whole scaffolding. It was all part of the ongoing saga of the castle's construction, a saga that stretched across centuries, a testament to the human capacity for both magnificent achievement and spectacular, hilarious failure. The relentless, seemingly endless work seemed to stretch the limits of human patience and endurance. Yet, it was precisely that very struggle, that almost insurmountable challenge, that gave the castle its unique character and historical significance. It wasn't just a fortress of stone, it was a monument to the human spirit, a testament to the enduring power of perseverance, even in the face of near constant setbacks. And perhaps, just perhaps, it held a dark, slightly macabre, yet undeniably hilarious narrative of human struggle in every imperfectly placed stone. He thought of old Giles, that tragically optimistic master mason, his image shifting from one of a legend to something much more relatable, a flawed, accident-prone human being grappling with a task far beyond even his considerable talents. Thomas Jr. smiled, a blend of awe and commiseration in his expression. Old Giles, it seemed, had left more than just a foundation for the castle. He had left a legacy of both wonder and humor, of ambition and slapstick, a testament to the human ability to overcome almost any challenge, one stone, one near disaster, one slightly inappropriate joke at a time. And Thomas Jr. knew with a wry smile that this ongoing saga would continue to be enriched, one stone, one mishap, one generation at a time. The castle itself with its haphazard beauty, was nothing less than a monument to the enduring human spirit and to the endless and often hilarious pursuit of something beyond the realm of simple human possibility. The king, bless his cotton socks, possessed a temperament as fickle as the spring weather. One day, he'd be enthralled by the vision of a grand, soaring chapel, its stained glass windows depicting scenes of his glorious victories, mostly fabricated, Thomas Jr. suspected, given the rather enthusiastic embellishments. The next, he'd declare the entire chapel concept utterly tiresome and demand a vast subterranean dungeon capable of holding an entire rebellious army, or perhaps a menagerie housing exotic beasts plundered from far off lands. His whims were as predictable as a swarm of angry wasps. This royal capriciousness translated into a logistical nightmare of epic proportions. Imagine, if you will, the meticulous planning involved in building a chapel, sourcing the right type of stone, fashioning the intricate arches, commissioning the stained glass. And then, bam, the king decides he'd rather have a bowling alley or a giant catapult capable of launching pumpkins across the entire kingdom. The workforce, naturally, was less than thrilled. The stone masons, who had painstakingly shaped blocks for the chapel's magnificent arches, now found themselves wrestling with massive boulders destined for the dungeon. The carpenters, busy crafting pews fit for royalty, were suddenly tasked with constructing ridiculously oversized bowling pins. The skilled artisans, who had been patiently painting delicate frescoes depicting saints and angels, found themselves splattering paint on the walls of a giant hamster wheel, a late-night royal whim, apparently inspired by a drunken wager. The logistics of these royal U-turns were a master class in medieval inefficiency. Materials intended for one project ended up abandoned halfway across the castle grounds, slowly weathering into uselessness. Work plans, painstakingly drawn up by successive master masons, each one, Thomas Jr., noted, possessed a unique and often maddening approach to architectural design, were ripped up and tossed aside, replaced by frantic scribbles on the back of the royal decrees. The king's fondness for extravagant feasts added to the chaos. Construction would come to a complete standstill while the workforce toiled to build temporary kitchens, vast dining halls, and enough latrines to accommodate the king's ever-growing retinue of nobles, courtiers, and assorted hangers-on. And then there was the problem of the budget, or rather, the utter lack of a coherent one. The king's treasury, despite its initial abundance, was swiftly depleted by a combination of opulent feasts, lavish gifts, often bestowed upon the courtiers who most effectively flattered his latest whim, and the constant reshuffling of construction materials. Poor Elias, the castle's perpetually stressed accountant, would emerge from his dimly lit office looking like a man who had wrestled a badger while simultaneously trying to solve a particularly complex equation involving the square root of -1. The sheer absurdity of it all was almost comical if it hadn't been such a profound impediment to progress. Thomas Jr. pictured the stone masons, their faces streaked with sweat and grime, staring blankly at a pile of half-finished bowling pins, the remnants of the chapel's aborted construction strewn around them like the debris of a medieval demolition derby. He imagined the carpenters, their hands raw and blistered, muttering darkly about the utter lunacy of it all while wrestling with the oversized hamster wheel. He had found a detailed account penned by a disgruntled carpenter named Bartholomew, who had apparently been responsible for building the unfortunate hamster wheel. The account detailed in excruciating detail the trials and tribulations involved in creating this oversized, rodent-sized torture device. Bartholomew had initially thought the assignment was a joke. It was a clearly absurd structure with no apparent purpose aside from the king's amusement. Bartholomew was not, by nature, a humorous man. In the words of his account, the king's idea was a pox upon my family for generations to come, along with the splinters which reside still in my backside. The king, of course, remained blissfully unaware of the turmoil he caused. He lived in a world of extravagant feasts, lavish banquets, and endless rounds of wine. He'd stroll around the construction site, clad in velvet robes and surrounded by a gaggle of fawning courtiers, occasionally pointing a jeweled finger at some unfortunate worker, demanding to know why the progress was not more rapid. The workers, hardened by years of back-breaking labor and the king's inconsistent commands, would grit their teeth and offer a mumbled apology and resume their work, or whatever ludicrous task the king's latest fancy dictated. The contrast between the king's opulent lifestyle and the harsh realities faced by the workers was stark. While the king feasted on roasted boar and drank vintage wines, the builders subsisted on meager rations of bread and gruel. While the king slept in a bed draped in silk, the workers huddled together in damp, cramped quarters, the sounds of their snoring forming a bizarre counterpoint to the king's pompous pronouncements. Thomas Jr. wondered with a dark chuckle if the castle's peculiar design, a haphazard jumble of chapels, dungeons, menageries, and hamster wheels, was a testament to the king's erratic leadership, or perhaps a subtle act of rebellion by the workers themselves, incorporating their frustrations into the very fabric of the structure. The slightly off-kilter walls, the oddly misplaced windows, even the infamous perpetually unfinished spiral staircase, the king had declared it too dull after the third collapse. All these imperfections seemed to whisper a story of constant frustration, a medieval saga punctuated by royal whims and workers' ingenious and often hilarious acts of defiance. One particularly amusing entry in Elias's meticulous ledger detailed a period when the king, in a fit of pique induced by a particularly poorly cooked pheasant, ordered a complete overhaul of the castle's kitchens, complete with a new, state-of-the-art, for the time of course, oven capable of roasting a whole ox. This resulted in a week-long delay in the main tower construction, as the entire stonemasonry team was reassigned to hauling bricks and installing the new oven. The ox, unfortunately, was never mentioned in the records. Its fate, one could only imagine, was possibly as unfortunate as those poor masons stuck in kitchen duty instead of working on the crucial stability of the North Tower. The whole enterprise was a lesson in the futility of trying to build something substantial under the weight of unpredictable leadership. Thomas Jr. felt a deep sense of both awe and amusement as he delved into the dusty chronicles, imagining the exasperation, the grit, and the dark humor that defined the lives of those who labored on the king's capricious castle. It was, undoubtedly, a grand folly, a monument not only to stone and mortar, but also to the enduring human capacity for perseverance, for adapting to chaos, and for finding humor in the face of near impossible odds. It was a testament to the resilience of those workers who somehow managed to erect an imposing structure, even when it was under the relentless assault of the king's ever changing plans and the perpetual threat of another royal whim altering the entirety of the project. The castle, in its haphazard glory, stood as a peculiar and slightly comical reminder of the unpredictability of power and the unyielding spirit of those who built it. The year is 1248. The castle, a monstrous half-finished behemoth of gray stone, claws its way towards the heavens. It's a testament to human ambition, a monument to backbreaking labor, and a running joke amongst the perpetually exhausted workforce. But its imposing silhouette, far from inspiring fear in potential enemies, presents a delicious target. For you see, building a castle is not merely a matter of stacking stones. It's a high-stakes game of architectural Tetris played against the backdrop of potential invasion. And our castle, still very much under construction, was about to learn this lesson the hard way, or perhaps almost the hard way. The king, ever oblivious to the practicalities of construction, as if a man who spends most of his day judging the ripeness of pears could possibly grasp the nuances of buttressing a castle wall, had completely underestimated the logistical nightmare of defending a structure still in the nascent stages of completion. Picture this: walls that were more gaps than barriers, towers that wobbled precariously, and a moat that, thanks to a particularly enthusiastic bout of royal spending on a new type of pheasant-flavored wine, was alarmingly dry. This wasn't exactly a fortress. It was a construction site with turrets. News arrived as unexpectedly as a royal decree demanding the immediate construction of a miniature replica of the Eiffel Tower, which, needless to say, never materialized. A band of disgruntled mercenaries, their ranks swollen by runaway tax collectors and disgruntled brewers, were marching towards the castle. Not to conquer it, mind you. That would require a proper army and a siege engine that could actually launch something heavier than a particularly aggressive pigeon. No, their aims were far more modest. A swift raid, a bit of opportunistic looting, and perhaps a cheeky sample of the king's aforementioned pheasant-flavored wine. Panic, as you might imagine, ensued. The stone masons, who had developed a rather impressive ability to stack stones with one hand while simultaneously swatting away flying masonry, swapped their trowels for rusty swords. The carpenters, whose calluses were as thick as medieval armor, sharpened their axes, their faces etched with a weary blend of frustration and grim determination. Even Elias, the accountant, donned a surprisingly well-maintained suit of armor, his ledger clutched tightly in one hand, ready to unleash his fury, or perhaps just his perfectly balanced expense report, upon the invaders. The sheer absurdity of the situation was not lost on the workers. Here they were, defending a castle that was less a fortress and more a collection of interconnected scaffolding, a testament to the king's unpredictable whims and the relentless march of medieval construction. Their enemy? A ragtag band of mercenaries, more likely to stumble over their own feet than breach a fortified wall. Yet, there they were, preparing for a siege that in all likelihood would be more comical than catastrophic. The siege, if one could even call it that, consisted mostly of a surprisingly polite exchange of insults, a few errant stones thrown from slingshots crafted from discarded scaffolding, and a rather dramatic standoff involving Elias, the accountant, who, wielding his ledger like a shield, somehow managed to accidentally trip the leader of the mercenaries, causing a domino effect that sent several of the mercenaries tumbling down a recently constructed and thankfully unfinished rampart. The mercenaries, after a brief but intense assessment of the situation, mainly fueled by observing the precarious nature of the unfinished structure and the sheer unhinged determination of the workers, decided discretion was the better part of valor. They hastily retreated, their loot consisting mainly of a rather dented bucket of leftover gruel and a collection of surprisingly well-preserved building plans, which, let's face it, were far more valuable than anything else they could have found in that chaotic construction site. The incident was recorded in the annals of the castle as the siege that wasn't, a testament to the bizarre, almost farcical reality of medieval castle construction. The narrative highlights not only the vulnerabilities of a work-in-progress fortress, but also the unexpected resourcefulness and often hilarious strategies employed by the builders to defend it. Thomas Jr., upon reading the chronicles, found himself chuckling. The irony was exquisite. A grand defensive structure under constant threat of siege while still in construction. The defenders, a motley crew of builders, outmaneuvered the enemy not with superior weaponry or military strategy, but through sheer luck, a lot of shouting, and the accidental tripping of a mercenary captain by an accountant. The king, of course, remained blissfully unaware of the near miss. He was, at that very moment, preoccupied with choosing the perfect shade of blue for the castle's yet-to-be-built ballroom. The workers, however, continued their labor, the memory of the siege serving as a strangely unifying experience, a shared absurdity in the face of a shared hardship. They knew, deep down, that their castle was far from invincible, still susceptible to more than just royal whims. But in their own peculiar way, they had triumphed. They had stared into the face of a siege, a pathetic little siege granted, and somehow, against all odds, they had won. Or rather, they had survived to build another day. And that, considering the circumstances, was no small feat. The castle, with its slightly wonky walls and unfinished towers, was a testament not only to the enduring human capacity for building against all odds, but also for finding humor amidst the chaos, a testament to a siege that wasn't, a story that underscored the absurdity and indeed the unexpected triumphs inherent in the chaotic world of medieval castle building. The tale is peppered with the dark humor of an impossible situation, one where an unfinished castle, more gap than structure, somehow managed to stand its ground, or rather, managed to not fall down in the face of a truly pathetic and comical siege. The sheer audacity of the situation, a poorly defended, half-built construction site staving off a disorganized band of mercenaries, was a comedic masterpiece. Imagine the scene: a motley crew of stone masons, wielding trowels like swords, carpenters armed with their axes, and Elias, the accountant, charging towards the enemy with his ledger aloft like a banner of defiance. The mercenaries, a disorganized bunch more accustomed to stealing sheep than assaulting castles, Finding themselves facing an unexpectedly determined and eccentric band of defenders would have certainly resulted in a scene worthy of a medieval farce. Perhaps one day, Thomas Jr. mused, someone would write a play based on the account. A comedic masterpiece it certainly would be. The aftermath of the near siege was as comical as the siege itself. The king, entirely unaware of the event, continued to issue his whimsical orders. The workers, exhausted but triumphant, returned to their tasks. Life, in the grand scheme of medieval castle construction, continued. The half-built fortress stood tall, a testament to the resilience of the workers, the capriciousness of kings, and the peculiar humor that somehow managed to survive in the most brutal of conditions. The siege that wasn't served as a morbidly funny footnote in the castle's history, a reminder that even in the midst of potential disaster, amidst the chaos of a half-finished edifice and a surprisingly inept band of invaders, there is always room for a hearty laugh. It was, after all, just another day at the office for those who dared to dream of building a castle, only to find themselves defending it against a rather underwhelming attack, a near miss that served only to highlight the absurdity and the unforeseen triumphs inherent in the construction of a medieval castle. The incomplete nature of the castle itself mirrored the unfinished, often comical nature of life itself, a stark reminder of just how unpredictable and humorous life could be, even in the midst of attempting to erect a stone fortress. The tale of the siege that wasn't becomes another brick in the wall of Thomas Jr.'s understanding of medieval castle building, a narrative demonstrating that the construction process wasn't simply about the laborious task of moving stones. It was also about survival, adaptability, and yes, even humor. It's a story filled with the chaos of unpredictable leadership, the resilience of workers facing impossible odds, and a generous dash of black comedy, the very essence of medieval castle building, a story where the unexpected became the norm, and even a thwarted siege could be a source of amusement. In the annals of the castle, the siege that wasn't lives on not as a tale of military defeat or heroic victory, but as a testament to the absurdity of life, the resilience of the human spirit, and the uncanny ability to find humor in the face of almost utter chaos. It's a reminder that even in the grimmest of circumstances, life frequently finds a way to be surprisingly, ridiculously, and hilariously unpredictable. The final stone was laid in 1317, 89 years after the first. 89 years of back-breaking labor, of frostbitten fingers and sun-baked skin, of arguments over the precise angle of a merlin and the best method for preventing mortar from crumbling in a downpour. 89 years of near-miss sieges, averted disasters, and the quiet, persistent determination of countless men and women whose names are lost to history, yet whose sweat and toil are etched into the very fabric of the castle's gray limestone. It stood, finally, a formidable structure, a testament to human perseverance, and an unintentional monument to the king's surprisingly consistent inability to grasp the complexities of logistics. The castle, now complete, was a magnificent sight. Its walls, once a series of haphazard gaps, were now solid. Its towers stood tall and proud, and the moat, thankfully refilled after the king's brief flirtation with pheasant-flavored wine, gleamed under the summer sun. The village that had sprouted up around it, initially a collection of rough-hewn huts, had transformed into a thriving community, its prosperity intrinsically linked to the castle's presence. The castle provided work, protection, and a sense of security, attracting merchants, craftsmen, and farmers who had fled less fortunate villages. This bustling village served as a stark reminder of the ripple effect of such a monumental structure, a structure built not only of stone and mortar, but of generations of lives, hopes, and aspirations. But the castle was more than just stones and mortar. It was a living, breathing entity, a microcosm of medieval society, its existence echoing the lives of those who built and inhabited it. The castle's walls contained echoes of laughter and tears, of triumphs and tragedies, of the countless conversations and struggles that shaped the lives of the castle's inhabitants. It's a silent observer. It witnessed generations coming and going, keeping silent watch over their joys and sorrows. It's a grand stage which played host to countless dramas of life, echoing their triumphs and failures within its imposing walls. The village, nestled securely within the shadow of the castle's walls, mirrored the castle's own evolution. Its humble beginnings, born from the necessity of supporting the castle's construction, had blossomed into a vibrant community. Its growth was a direct result of the castle's influence and security, a silent testament to the economic and social impact of such ambitious construction projects. The castle didn't just stand, it fostered life. It was more than a fortress. It was a catalyst for a community, its imposing walls providing a cradle of civilization and prosperity. The king, having finally moved past his obsession with pheasant-flavored wine and the questionable color of ballrooms, eventually paid a visit to the finished castle. He toured the grounds, his retinue trailing behind him like a gaggle of overfed geese. His comments were limited to admiring the impressive size of the structure and the sheer number of servants available to fan him on the hottest days. But he did utter a rare moment of genuine, albeit accidental, wisdom. "It certainly is large," he noted while inspecting the ramparts, providing an accurate, if somewhat lacking in depth, assessment of the colossal structure. His lack of interest in construction never faded, but at least this time, the structure was actually complete. A milestone reached through the perseverance and resilience of the tireless workers who had dedicated a lifetime to its completion. However, even his royal indifference couldn't completely eclipse the monumental achievement. The castle stood as a stark reminder of the human capacity for immense undertaking, an imposing structure that emerged from a collaborative effort spanning almost a century against the backdrop of logistical challenges, unpredictable weather, and the capricious whims of royalty. It was a testament to the power of human resilience, the determination to see a project to completion despite almost insurmountable obstacles, and a significant feat that would have the lasting impact for generations to come. Thomas Jr., now a weathered man with eyes that held the wisdom of centuries, surveyed the completed castle from the hill overlooking the village. He saw not just a magnificent structure of stone, but a living tapestry woven from the lives and labors of generations, a testament to the grit, perseverance, and yes, even the dark humor of those who had built it. He understood that each stone held within its rough-hewn surface a memory, a story, a piece of the remarkable history that had created this marvel of medieval architecture. Each imperfection, each slight misalignment, each testament to the human hand that had formed it, all stood as proof that this imposing structure was created with passion, struggle, and resilience, a beacon of the human will, echoing in the imposing presence of the completed castle. He saw the legacy in the limestone, not just in the castle itself, but in the thriving village it had fostered, in the lives it had touched, in the stories it would continue to tell for centuries to come. It was a legacy forged not just in stone, but in the sweat, the tears, and the surprisingly resilient laughter of those who had dared to dream of building a castle, and against all odds had succeeded. Their efforts weren't just etched in stone, they were imbued in the very spirit of the community it had spawned, and the enduring presence of this majestic castle. The legacy of the castle extended far beyond its physical form, reaching into the heart of the community it supported and the lives it touched. This imposing castle stood as a tangible testament to the collaborative effort of generations, their resilience, determination, and the ability to find moments of humor within the chaos of construction. It was a silent testament to the human spirit, an enduring structure that would continue to inspire generations. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape, illuminating the castle in a golden glow. It stood, a proud sentinel against the twilight sky, a silent testament to a century spent in stone, a legacy carved in limestone, a narrative etched into every rough-hewn block, a story of sweat, toil, and the surprisingly resilient human spirit, a story of perseverance against unbelievable odds, and a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. It was a legacy in limestone, forever reminding everyone of the incredible endeavor of medieval castle construction and the indelible mark left by those who had dared to dream. A legacy born from the struggles of countless individuals whose efforts have given rise to this monumental structure and the thriving community that surrounds it. A tale that would be recounted for centuries, as the castle silently stood as a testament to their resilience, determination, and their enduring contribution to the fabric of history. Chapter 3. Then and Now. The wind whipped through Thomas Jr.'s beard, carrying the scent of fresh concrete and distant diesel fumes, a far cry from the earthy smell of limestone dust and sweat that had permeated his childhood. He stood on the precipice of a modern construction site, a cacophony of activity, a stark contrast to the measured, agonizing pace of the castle's creation. Towering cranes, metallic birds of prey, clawed at the sky, lifting prefabricated sections of steel and glass with an effortless grace that would have rendered his medieval forebears speechless. Where his father and grandfather had wrestled with hand-hewn stones, their bodies bearing the scars of a brutal trade, here men in hard hats moved with a practiced efficiency, guided by blueprints and laser levels, their hands protected by gloves, their bodies shielded by safety harnesses. The precision was breathtaking, the speed astonishing. A section of building, equivalent in size to a whole medieval tower, could be assembled in a matter of hours, a feat that would have taken generations in his father's time. He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that echoed the wind. Imagine explaining the concept of a crane, to those medieval stonemasons, their faces etched with the strain of hauling blocks up rickety scaffolding. Their reaction would likely have been a mixture of awe and disbelief, followed by a grudging admission that perhaps, just perhaps, this crane thing was a slight improvement over their system of ropes and sheer manpower. He thought of his father, his shoulders stooped under the weight of years and countless stones, his hands gnarled like ancient tree roots. He'd spent a lifetime building a castle and died before the completion. The difference in lifespan was striking. What had taken nearly a century then now happened in a fraction of the time, possibly at a fraction of the cost. The safety measures alone would have astonished his forefathers. Hard hats, safety boots, scaffolding that didn't groan ominously under the weight of materials. These were luxuries unimaginable in the medieval world. He pictured the endless stream of accidents, the mangled fingers, the crushed toes, the occasional fatality swallowed by the ever-hungry earth of the construction pit. The lack of any safety equipment made it a daily struggle of survival, and yet they persisted, building a castle. He recalled the stories, whispered over mugs of lukewarm ale in the village tavern. The time old hemlock fell from the scaffolding, landing with a sickening thud that was only slightly less dramatic than the king's attempts to ride a horse. The day young Alara's hand was crushed by a rogue boulder, the scream echoing across the construction site. The near misses that should have been fatal. It was a brutal existence, and the only safety equipment they had was luck and the prayers of their village priest. In comparison, even the modern-day construction site had a remarkable safety record, though the workers still faced considerable risks. He walked toward the main structure, towering over the modern landscape with a gleaming glass and steel facade. The sheer scale of the modern project dwarfed even the castle, a testament to the ever-increasing capacity of human engineering. The speed of construction was another significant difference. Modern technology allowed for the completion of projects in years rather than centuries. The differences in efficiency were clear. Modern cranes and other heavy machinery could lift massive sections of material in minutes, whereas in the medieval period, the same task could take days, perhaps weeks. Modern engineering and design tools were crucial for such efficiency. Precision instruments enabled architects and engineers to create intricate details and complex structures with accuracy previously unimaginable. In contrast, medieval builders relied on simple tools, hand-drawn plans, and their own skill to build the structures. Even with all the modern safety protocols and technology, he wondered if the builders in that modern site ever stopped and felt the same satisfaction as his ancestors when they finally laid that last stone. This same quiet pride that was visible in his father's eyes as he surveyed his work. He doubted it. The sheer scale and complexity of modern projects often obscured the individual contributions of workers. In the medieval era, each stone was a testament to the builder's skill and effort. Each stone in his father's castle held a memory, a story, a connection to the person who had carved and laid it. Here, the sheer volume, the anonymity of the modern process stripped away the individuality. But then he smiled wryly. The medieval builders, bless their hearts, hadn't had to deal with health and safety regulations, environmental impact assessments, or the agonizingly slow processes of obtaining planning permission. The king's whim, however capricious, was often faster than modern bureaucracy. And while modern workers enjoyed better safety standards, even the most well-equipped site had its own share of mishaps, delays, and the constant struggle against deadlines, weather, and the occasional catastrophic failure of a machine. Modern workers faced a different kind of struggle: deadlines, budgets, and the sheer pressure to complete complex projects within strict time frames. He thought of the king, eternally oblivious to the true cost of his castle, and smiled again. His Majesty would have been utterly bewildered by the complexity of modern project management, the intricate web of contracts, subcontractors, and the sheer number of stakeholders involved. He imagined the king's attempts to decipher a modern building plan, probably declaring it unnecessarily complicated or possibly even a new form of witchcraft, and the hilarious panic of the architect attempting to explain the concept of a Gantt chart, which even after detailed explanations would likely end with the king stating it is a tool far too complex for his understanding and far too unflattering to the royal purple hue of his favorite ballroom. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the modern construction site. The stark contrast between the two periods, medieval and modern, made him feel that while the tools had changed radically, the basic human struggle to shape the world according to our needs remained constant. The spirit of those medieval builders, their stubborn determination, their resilience in the face of almost insurmountable odds, that spirit lived on, whether in the hand-hewn stone of a forgotten castle or in the gleam of modern steel and glass. Only the scale and methods had changed. The human endeavor to create, to build, to leave a mark on the world remained gloriously, maddeningly the same. And maybe, just maybe, that was the enduring testament to the human spirit itself, the ability to adapt and to build against all odds, amidst chaos and frustration, no matter the tools at hand. The hum of the construction site, a relentless drone of machinery, grated on Thomas Jr.'s nerves, a stark counterpoint to the almost meditative silence that had cloaked the medieval castle's construction. He watched a monstrous digger scoop up tons of earth, spewing it into a waiting lorry, a process that would have taken dozens of men weeks, possibly months, with picks and shovels. The efficiency was terrifying. The sheer scale of the operation was breathtaking, yet it left him feeling strangely empty. The castle, built slowly, painstakingly over decades, had woven itself into the very fabric of the landscape. Its foundations were set in the earth, its stones sourced locally, its existence almost symbiotic with its surroundings. This modern behemoth, however, felt like an invasive species, a metal and glass parasite sucking the life from the land. He thought of the quarries that had supplied the limestone for the castle. Men, women, and children toiled in those pits, their lives etched into the very rock they extracted. The waste was minimal, the materials used carefully considered, often repurposed when deemed no longer fit for the main construction. A broken stone might become part of a supporting wall, or a piece of rubble used to reinforce a foundation. Waste was almost a foreign concept. Here, the volume of waste was staggering. Mountains of concrete, steel, plastic, and timber destined for landfills, a stark testament to the throwaway culture of modern construction. The very air hummed with the stench of diesel fumes, a toxic cloud clinging to the skyline, a far cry from the clean, crisp air of the medieval countryside. He remembered his grandfather's stories, tales of the masons who knew the land intimately, who selected each stone with care, considering its weight, its texture, its suitability for its intended purpose. They understood the land, respecting its rhythms, its limitations. The modern workers, on the other hand, seemed oblivious to the environment, their actions driven solely by deadlines and profit margins. The land was merely a resource to be exploited, a commodity to be consumed. The sheer scale of the project was breathtaking, yet left him feeling oddly uneasy. He pondered the social cost of this rapid development. The medieval castle builders, however poorly paid and treated, were part of a community, their lives interwoven with the lives of their neighbors, their families, and their fellow workers. They shared in the triumphs and tribulations of the project, their identity intrinsically linked to the creation of the castle. Here, the workers were anonymous cogs in a vast machine, their individual contributions obscured by the sheer scale of the operation. Their connection to the project was temporary and transient. The speed of modern construction demanded constant movement, rapid turnover, leading to a pervasive lack of personal investment and a disregard for long-term impacts. Thomas Jr. recalled a documentary he'd seen on the construction of a modern skyscraper. He'd been shocked by the number of worker deaths, the accidents, the seemingly preventable tragedies that were written off as part of the job, shrugged off, a mere statistic in a spreadsheet. In the medieval period, a worker's death might cause ripples across the community, creating a profound sense of loss and shared grief. The loss would be palpable. Here, it seemed to be accepted, an unfortunate but necessary byproduct of progress. The scale of modern construction also had far-reaching consequences on the surrounding community. The noise, the disruption, the impact on local businesses, all were felt acutely by the people who lived near these megastructures. In the medieval era, while life wasn't easy, the pace of construction meant that the impact on the surrounding communities was far less disruptive. The changes were gradual, integrated into the rhythm of life. The construction of the castle had been a slow process, allowing the community to adapt, to integrate it into their daily lives. He considered the contrast in approaches to material sourcing. Medieval builders used local materials whenever possible, minimizing transportation costs and environmental impact. The stone came from nearby quarries, the timber from nearby forests, the thatch from local fields. The cycle was local, the waste minimal. Modern construction, in contrast, often relied on materials sourced from across the globe, leading to increased transportation costs, pollution, and environmental damage. The carbon footprint was enormous, the impact on distant lands often unseen, unheard, ignored. He found himself reflecting on the king's apparent obliviousness to the human cost of his castle. The king hadn't seen the injuries, the deaths, the heartbreak. He only saw the finished product, the monument to his power and glory. The modern equivalent, however, wasn't a king but a corporation, a faceless entity driven by profit. Its leaders were equally removed from the realities of the construction site, oblivious to the human cost and the environmental damage. The only concerns were deadlines and profits, the human and environmental costs externalized. Almost an afterthought, the sun set, casting a long shadow across the construction site. The contrast between the two eras was stark, but the core issues remained the same: human ambition, the relentless drive to build, to create, to leave a mark on the world. This persisted, but the methods, the understanding of costs, the appreciation of the long-term consequences, these had evolved, or perhaps devolved. The modern world boasted unprecedented speed and efficiency, but at what cost? The question hung heavy in the air, a bitter aftertaste to the sweet taste of progress. The price of progress, he realized, was far higher than anyone cared to acknowledge, and it was being paid in ways far beyond immediate sight. The bill, he suspected, would be presented in the future, perhaps to generations yet unborn. The museum exhibit hummed with a low, almost imperceptible energy, a stark contrast to the cacophony of the modern construction site Thomas Jr. had just left. Rows of meticulously labeled displays showcased the raw materials, the tools, and the fragments of lives invested in the creation of medieval castles. Here, the limestone wasn't just a lifeless rock, it was a testament to human endeavor, etched with the sweat, the grit, and the occasional desperate prayer of generations of laborers. He ran a hand along a rough-hewn block, imagining the calloused fingers that had shaped it, the back-breaking effort required to haul it from the quarry. One display held a collection of masons' tools, crude chisels, hammers, and mallets, their worn surfaces whispering tales of countless hours spent shaping stone. Next to them lay a collection of broken tools, the remnants of accidents, of moments of carelessness, of the inevitable wear and tear of relentless physical labor. Each fractured chisel, each splintered handle spoke volumes about the harsh realities of medieval construction. It wasn't just the physical toll, but the mental one as well. The relentless repetition, the back-breaking work under the unforgiving sun, the constant threat of injury. It was a recipe for exhaustion, frustration, and perhaps even madness. The tools, in their broken state, were as much a testament to human resilience as they were to the unforgiving nature of the task. Another case displayed fragments of half-finished archways, incomplete walls, and sections of battlements. These weren't the polished, finished products we see in pictures. These were the rough edges, the mistakes, the moments of imperfection that speak to the human element inherent in all construction. The builders, lacking the precise measurements and sophisticated techniques of modern construction, had to rely on their skill, their intuition, their collective experience. They made mistakes, they adapted, they improvised. These fragments, far from representing failure, were evidence of a relentless, adaptive process, a testament to human ingenuity and the will to persevere. It was a process rife with imperfection, but ultimately successful. Thomas Jr. found himself pondering the collaborative nature of medieval castle building. Unlike modern construction, where workers are often isolated in their specialized tasks, medieval builders worked as a collective, each individual contributing to the larger whole. Masons, carpenters, laborers, and even women and children, they all played their part in a complex, interwoven process. The success of the project rested not on individual brilliance, but on collective effort, shared knowledge, and a deep understanding of their interdependence. This sense of community, of shared purpose, was essential to the success of these monumental undertakings. He moved to a section devoted to the logistics of medieval construction. Maps and diagrams illustrated the meticulous planning required to transport massive stones, timbers, and other materials over often treacherous terrain. The lack of modern machinery meant that everything was moved by human muscle power, a feat of organization and sheer determination that is almost unimaginable today. He imagined the countless journeys, the strained muscles, the sweat soaked brows, the sheer physical endurance required to move these materials to their designated locations. It was a logistics puzzle solved not through technology, but through human ingenuity, patience, and relentless hard work. The meticulous record keeping, the constant adjustments based on the changing landscape and unforeseen circumstances spoke to a level of planning and adaptation rarely seen in today's projects driven by tight deadlines and an even tighter profit margins. The exhibit also highlighted the resilience inherent in the medieval building process. Castles weren't built in a few years. They were often decades, even centuries, in the making. Generations of builders worked on the same project, each contributing their skills and knowledge to the evolving structure. Setbacks were inevitable. Storms, fires, wars, and the simple exhaustion of human endeavor. But the project persisted. The castle, a testament to the human spirit, was constructed through sustained effort, through a dogged determination to persevere despite adversity. It was a process of constant adaptation, of learning from past mistakes, of building upon the foundations laid by previous generations. A display focused on the sources of materials. The limestone, specifically, was the focus. Samples from various quarries were on show, their texture and color slightly varied, hinting at the careful selection process employed by the builders. The local provenance of much of the material reduced transport costs and environmental impact, a stark contrast to modern projects where materials are often sourced globally, creating complex supply chains with environmental and economic consequences. This emphasis on local resources not only reduced the carbon footprint of construction, but also fostered a deeper connection between the builders and their environment. The builders understood the land, its limitations, and its potential. They worked with it rather than against it. The exhibit concluded with a comparison of medieval and modern construction techniques. The contrast was striking. The primitive tools and techniques of the medieval period were juxtaposed with the advanced technology of modern construction. The sheer speed and efficiency of modern methods were undeniable, but so was the environmental cost and the often ignored human toll. Modern construction, despite its speed, often lacked the meticulous planning, the collaborative spirit, and the resilience of medieval castle building. It raised questions about the sustainability and ethical implications of our modern building practices. Leaving the museum, Thomas Jr. felt a renewed appreciation for the medieval builders. He had started by contrasting the agonizing slowness of medieval construction with the efficiency of modern methods, almost mocking the former. But the exhibit had shown him the intrinsic value in the medieval methods, the deep understanding of materials, the dedication of the workforce, the collaboration, the endurance that created structures of unbelievable strength and lasting power. The medieval builders, despite their primitive tools and arduous labor, had created structures that had endured for centuries, a testament to their skill, their resilience, and their understanding of the relationship between human effort and the natural world. Their methods, while crude by modern standards, had a wisdom and a sustainability we have almost entirely forgotten. The lesson wasn't simply about the speed of construction, but the profound respect for the materials, the process, and the people involved, a respect lost in the relentless pursuit of efficiency and profit in modern times. The true cost of progress, Thomas Jr. realized, was far more complex and far-reaching than the mere sum of money spent. It was a cost that extended to the environment, the community, and to the very soul of the human endeavor. Leaving the museum, the stark contrast between the painstakingly slow construction methods of the medieval era and the breakneck speed of modern building techniques lingered in Thomas Jr.'s mind. He'd come seeking a humorous comparison, a wry chuckle at the absurdity of medieval builders wrestling with rudimentary tools. But the exhibit had unexpectedly stirred something deeper, a grudging admiration. He found himself drawn to the enduring appeal of stone, not just as a building material, but as a symbol of resilience, of a time when human effort was measured in generations, not in quarterly reports. The city skyline, a jagged panorama of glass and steel, loomed before him, a monument to modern efficiency. Towering skyscrapers, each a testament to engineering prowess and rapid construction, seemed to sneer at the relative clumsiness of their medieval predecessors. Yet, as he watched the shimmering glass facades reflect the setting sun, a disquieting thought settled in. These structures, built with breathtaking speed, possessed an ephemeral quality, a fleeting existence compared to the centuries-old stones that still stood sentinel across Europe. The image of a medieval castle, a hulking mass of weathered stone, instantly conjured a vastly different feeling, a sense of permanence, of endurance, of stories whispered in the very fabric of the stones themselves. He recalled images from countless films and books, the imposing ramparts of Hogwarts, the brooding majesty of Camelot, the imposing silhouette of Edinburgh Castle piercing the Scottish sky. These weren't mere buildings. They were archetypes, cultural touchstones that resonated across centuries, their images permeating our collective unconscious. This enduring appeal isn't merely aesthetic. It transcends the physicality of stone and mortar, tapping into deeper cultural narratives. Castles symbolize power, resilience, history, and the enduring human struggle for dominance. Their imagery pervades our modern culture, a testament to their profound and lasting influence. Consider the prevalence of castle imagery in video games, movies, and literature. From the fantastical realms of Game of Thrones to the gritty realism of historical dramas, castles remain potent symbols, frequently representing both strength and vulnerability, aspiration and decay. The enduring fascination with medieval castles is further amplified by their romantic allure. The very word castle conjures up images of valiant knights, fair maidens, and epic battles. Images far removed from the harsh reality of backbreaking labor, disease, and constant threat of attack which were the daily bread of the people who actually lived within castle walls. This romanticized vision is heavily fueled by popular culture, from Disney's fairy tale castles to the Gothic grandeur of countless novels and films. The truth, however, is often far grittier than the fairy tale. But this romanticism is itself a part of the castle's enduring appeal. It speaks to a longing for a simpler, more heroic age, a yearning for a time when life, however brutal, possessed a certain clarity, a stark contrast to the complexities and ambiguities of modern life. The castle, with all its imperfections and historical baggage, becomes a canvas for our collective dreams and anxieties, a reflection of our own hopes and fears projected onto the weathered stones. The contrast between medieval and modern architecture highlights this disparity even further. Modern buildings, often designed for functionality and efficiency, lack the inherent storytelling potential of medieval castles. A modern office block, however impressive, doesn't whisper tales of sieges, betrayals, and centuries of human drama. It doesn't evoke the same sense of history, the same resonance with the human experience. It's a functional space, designed for a specific purpose, its life cycle measured in decades rather than centuries. The enduring appeal of medieval castles is not simply about aesthetics. It's a testament to the power of human storytelling, the ability to imbue objects with meaning, to transform raw materials into symbols of enduring cultural significance. The castles themselves, standing as they do as silent witnesses to the passage of time, become living artifacts, their stories etched not only in their stones, but in our collective imagination. This enduring presence in our culture is remarkable when considering the physical realities of their construction. The medieval castle was not simply a building. It was a monument to human endeavor, a testament to the unwavering commitment of countless individuals who poured their sweat, their tears, and sometimes their lives into its creation. The conditions under which these structures were built were often brutal. Long hours, dangerous work, rudimentary tools, and a constant risk of injury or death. This stark reality stands in stark contrast to the romanticized imagery often associated with these structures. Yet, even acknowledging these harsh conditions, the castles remain captivating. Perhaps this paradox, this tension between the brutal reality and the romanticized image, is a crucial element of their enduring appeal. It speaks to the enduring human capacity to transform adversity into something beautiful, to imbue even the most arduous tasks with meaning and purpose. The castle, in a sense, becomes a symbol of this transformation, a reminder that even from the most challenging circumstances, something magnificent can emerge. Furthermore, the sheer scale and longevity of these structures further contribute to their enduring appeal. They are tangible representations of human ambition, of the capacity to conceive and execute projects of immense scale and complexity. The time it took to construct these buildings, often spanning decades and even centuries, is almost incomprehensible in our fast-paced modern world. This speaks to a level of commitment and dedication that is rarely seen today, reinforcing the sense of their monumental achievement. The materials themselves also play a significant role. The rough-hewn stones, the sturdy timbers, the enduring strength of the walls, all these speak to a connection with the earth, a tangible link to the past. Unlike modern materials, which can feel cold and impersonal, these natural materials hold a certain warmth and character, adding another layer to the castle's overall allure. They have weathered storms, seen wars, and endured for centuries, their surfaces bearing witness to the passage of time. Each imperfection, each scratch, each weathered stone is a testament to their longevity, to their resilience, and to the enduring power of human craftsmanship. But perhaps the most significant aspect of their enduring appeal is their ability to evoke a sense of wonder, a feeling of awe and admiration. Standing before a medieval castle, one can't help but be struck by its grandeur, its imposing scale, its sheer presence. It transports the observer to another time, a time of knights and chivalry, of kings and queens, of epic struggles and daring deeds. This ability to transport us, to connect us with a distant past, is a crucial component of the castle's enduring charm. It's this connection to a richer, more layered past, a past we can only glimpse through fragmented evidence and our collective imagination, that continues to fascinate and enthrall us. In conclusion, the enduring appeal of medieval castles extends far beyond their aesthetic qualities. They are powerful symbols, cultural touchstones, and tangible embodiments of human endeavor. Their longevity, the materials used in their construction, the stories they silently tell, and the romantic imagery associated with them all contribute to their continued presence in our collective consciousness. They serve as a constant reminder of the power of human ambition, resilience, and the enduring legacy of those who came before us, a legacy built, quite literally, stone by stone, generation after generation. The romanticized vision, while perhaps not entirely accurate in the minutiae of daily life within castle walls, nevertheless captures a significant part of their enduring appeal. They stand as testaments not only to architectural prowess, but also to the enduring human fascination with stories of power, resilience, and the passage of time. The biting November wind whipped around Thomas Jr. as he stood before the meticulously crafted replica of a 13th century castle. It wasn't quite the imposing, centuries-old behemoth he'd envisioned, but it was undeniably impressive. Gleaming new stone, perfectly cut and precisely placed, replaced the weathered, time-worn surfaces of its ancient counterparts. The battlements, impeccably smooth, lacked the telltale scars of sieges and weathering, the charming irregularities of age that hinted at a life far more complex than its modern imitation could ever encompass. Here, no mortar stained with the blood and sweat of generations marred the pristine facade. This was not a testament to human struggle, but to modern engineering efficiency. It was, to put it bluntly, a cheat code on the game of medieval castle construction. He chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. The absurdity of it all struck him. The sheer contrast between the arduous, centuries-long process of building a real medieval castle and the relatively swift erection of this modern copy. One imagined medieval masons, their hands raw and bleeding, hauling colossal stones with ropes and sheer muscle, painstakingly fitting them together with rudimentary tools, their progress measured in agonizingly slow inches. Here, in contrast, cranes swung effortlessly, precision-cut stones slotted into place with practiced ease, and the entire project was overseen by project managers with clipboards and smartphones, scheduling deadlines down to the minute. A small sign proudly proclaimed, "Completed in 18 months." 18 months, a blink of an eye compared to the decades, sometimes centuries, that the originals had taken to build. He ran a hand along the smooth, cool surface of the replica's wall. The lack of texture, the absence of the subtle irregularities born of centuries of exposure to the elements, felt strangely unnerving. It was like touching a flawless but emotionless imitation, a perfect forgery of a soul. The stone itself, while undoubtedly strong, lacked the depth, the character, the sheer storytelling potential of the real deal. It possessed the sterile perfection of a modern computer-generated image, lacking the human touch, the imperfections, the inherent narrative woven into the fabric of its medieval counterparts. He thought of the countless nameless men and women who had toiled for generations, their lives intertwined with the very stones they laid. They were more than mere laborers. They were artisans, engineers, architects, all rolled into one, working with limited tools, materials, and knowledge. Their work wasn't simply a physical process, it was an act of creation, an expression of human ingenuity and resilience, a struggle against the elements and the constraints of their time. Their sweat, their blood, their very lives were quite literally built into the stones of every medieval castle that still stood. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. These were not just buildings. They were monuments to perseverance, sacrifice, and a level of dedication almost incomprehensible in our modern world, obsessed with instant gratification. This modern replica, for all its technical perfection, lacked that soul. It was a ghost of a castle, an echo of a bygone era, devoid of the very essence of what made the originals so compelling. This perfectly crafted substitute was as sterile as a doctor's examining room, a stark contrast to the rugged charm and character of a real medieval fortress. The replica, a monument to modern speed and efficiency, could never hope to replace the enduring appeal of its ancient ancestors. He smiled grimly. The medieval builders wouldn't have had the luxury of perfectly leveled foundations, advanced machinery, or even standardized measurements. Imagine the arguments, the misunderstandings, the inevitable clashes between the master mason and his perpetually under-resourced team. The plans were probably scribbled on scraps of parchment, subject to the whim of a lord who changed his mind about the placement of a turret mid-construction, or perhaps simply got distracted by the latest court intrigue. It was a recipe for disaster, for chaos, for an incredible amount of wasted effort and repeated trial and error. One could practically hear the medieval equivalent of, "Oh, for crying out loud." That's not the right size, echoing through the centuries. But that chaos, that very imperfection, is what gives the old castles their character, their charm, their enduring appeal. Their very existence is a testament to human resilience, to the ability to overcome adversity, to achieve remarkable things despite limitations and setbacks. This modern replica, flawless in its execution, was ultimately a reflection of a world obsessed with perfect efficiency, of a society that prioritizes speed over endurance and immediate results over lasting legacies. Thomas Jr. thought of the workers' lives, the bone-jarring work, the endless struggle against gravity, the constant threat of injury or death, the rudimentary tools, the cold and damp conditions, the sheer back-breaking labor. The conditions were medieval, but the castle was not. The modern counterpart served as a poignant reminder of just how far construction techniques and materials had advanced, and even how much less challenging construction was in the modern era. It's an age where the workers are protected, at least on paper, by modern safety regulations, a far cry from the often deadly conditions of medieval construction. Yet, in this very contrast lies a profound irony. The speed and efficiency of modern construction, while undeniably impressive, have also resulted in a loss of something essential, a loss of the soul, the history, the very essence that makes the ancient castles such captivating monuments to human endeavor. He stood there, the wind tugging at his coat, and felt a grudging admiration for those medieval builders. They didn't have the tools, the resources, or the technology, yet they managed to create structures that have stood the test of time, structures that continue to inspire awe and wonder, and that speak eloquently of the enduring power of the human spirit and its ability to shape the very world around it. The contrast between then and now, though stark, served as a testament not just to progress, but to the enduring power of human ingenuity and resilience. In that sense, the perfect replica, immaculate and precise, ultimately fell short of the crude, imperfect, yet ultimately magnificent originals. The final stone, the final word, belonged to the builders of the past, their work whispering across the centuries, a story etched in weathered stone and human perseverance.